thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Maggie for that warm introduction, and ACMS for the warm welcome. I'm based, like Maggie said, at Albany Law School. Normally, I'm on a teaching sabbatical this year, which means I don't have to be in the classroom, so part of that is, brings me here. So I'm going to talk about the work that I'm doing with the General Judicial Council, which administers the courts here in Mongolia. So I have a couple slides. I'm going to move through them, and then hopefully we can have a conversation too about what some of the issues that I'm raising. I'm raising way more than we can cover right now, but I just want to scratch through. It's mainly because I didn't want to make a decision about anything too specific, so some broad topics. Judicial independence, what the heck does that mean? What does it mean in the context of this country, in Mongolia? Law and technology, specifically how do we use digital systems to improve judicial independence as well as trust among people in the courts. And then Mongolian property rights is more me learning about the system of allocating property here in Mongolia. And as a foreigner, someone who didn't know 4 weeks ago anything about property rights here, just some initial perceptions and then some questions that I have. Sound good? Cool. Mongolia has challenges and opportunities. This is me speaking as a foreigner coming to this country. In terms of challenges, I think the column on the left is not a surprise. There's issues with pollution. Some of that's related to climate. Things get worse in the winter here in the capital. There's issues with corruption in terms of allocating resources. In terms of the capital, we have traffic. We have lack of urban planning that lets people move around easily. We have neighbors, right? We have neighbors which create challenges for the government here, for the business community. But in terms of opportunities, I think there's a ton of opportunities as well. It's an incredibly entrepreneurial culture and people. With respect to democratic values, and individualism, there's a fierce sense of individualism that I think is evident just by being present here in the capital. Vast country with lots of natural beauty, tons of ecotourism existing, opportunities for more, and it's a very literate country that has embraced digital devices. Almost 100% of the country is using cell phones, at least mobile devices. So, outsider perspective, challenges and opportunities. Nothing really that's overtly legal system related, but that's just my sense. In terms of the judicial system, there's a couple recent developments that I think are worth mentioning. So in 2022, Parliament adopted a judicial development program, and I think that's significant to note. And then, as a part of that, which is relevant to why I'm here, is there's a court digitalization program that is part of the judicial development program that has been authorized and is being adopted by the General Judicial Council and being implemented this year. So what's court digitalization? It's a process of using technology to help citizens and businesses and groups navigate the court system using technology in a way that works to meet their needs. The General Judicial Council is responsible for administering, so there's 116 different courts in the country currently, and right now they have 22 different case management systems. The goal by the start of 2025 is to have one system that allows all those systems to talk to each other and provides users the opportunity to file cases in a variety of those 116 different courts. So something that's outward facing. That's the task. Clearly it's going to be a multi-year phase in to happen. But this is I think the sort of working hypothesis that I have is that if court digitalization, or the process of using technology to improve courts, can make courts more transparent, and transparency can improve judicial independence, sunlight's the best disinfectant, then court digitalization can increase judicial independence. That's sort of a working notion that I think is the reason behind why we care about technology and the judiciary. Does that make sense? Generally? So I think that's sort of the reason behind the process overall. I got here 4 weeks ago. The goals of the project that I've been working on is twofold. The first is to build on and further the 20-year relationship, at least, that the Mongolian court system has had with a variety of groups in the United States. So we have a National Center for State Courts, which is based in the Washington, D.C. area. We have a number of state courts, judges and administrators that have been visiting to provide information on best practices around the shift to electronic filing of court records and digitalization generally. So the first goal that I've had is to continue to build on the knowledge sharing between U.S. stakeholders and the Mongolian court system. So that's the second. That's the first. The second has been to advise. There's a court digitalization team within the General Judicial Council that's very new. They started 3 months ago. And to talk with them about questions that they have about best practices in terms of moving to an e-file system. That's what I've been doing. Those are the goals that the project that I'm carrying out has sort of set out. And what I've been doing, I've been meeting with a lot of different groups. So in this country, we have advocates. Advocates are attorneys that represent clients in court. There's the Bar Association. The Bar Association includes judges, prosecutors, as well as advocates. There's a number of law schools. I've been meeting with some law school faculty, meeting with law students, visiting courts. There's civil courts, there's criminal courts, and there's administrative courts, as well as meeting with members internally to the General Judicial Council. There's an IT team, there's a court digitalization team. Some pictures. Meeting with, this is outside of criminal courts in Bayangol district. This is faculty from the National University of Mongolia. This is from the Advocates Association. Today, I visited a court. This is a blind justice, lady justice, painted by the chief judge of the Tove district civil court. And I included it just because I thought it was very nice. And this is the judge who painted it. So in talking with individuals, judges, stakeholders, been developing my own opinions and perceptions about the court system, which I'm going to talk about very briefly. And then this is collecting interesting pamphlets. This is what happens when you're ready for a divorce in Hanal district. So after 4 weeks of talking with people, doing my own research, what I think the key aspect of using technology to advance legal rights involves 3 things. The first is that someone needs to know they have a legal right. They need knowledge about the law. It's a substantive issue. The second is that they need to know the process. They need to know how to assert that right using the court system. And then the third piece with respect to technology is that people need to figure out how to use technology to use the process, to use the court system to assert their right in a way that advances the substance of the right that they have. A key component of that is court digital literacy, or digital literacy generally. And that's a 3-step process, which mirrors what I said a moment ago. You need to know you have a right, you need to know how to assert the right, and you need to know how to use technology to do that. So adopting a system, whatever that system is going to require require training. We talked a lot about, David and I were talking a little bit about media literacy too, which I think has a lot of crossover relevancy. People in the general population need to know each of these areas. They need to know substance, they need to know process, and they need to be comfortable with technology. So I think that's, so digital literacy with respect to legal rights is an important thing. And I think it's going to be an important component of this project going forward, however it goes. I started having a conversation with some of our friends on the right side of the room earlier. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, when I talk to people for the first time, generally they have a pretty negative perception of the court system when they have no involvement in it, or with it. Individuals who have had some involvement with the court system and got a successful resolution, even if they didn't necessarily win, had a better perception, which to me sounds like an opportunity. If you are able to engage meaningfully with citizens about their rights, you can talk them, you can explain how to assert your rights. This is what the process is, and this is how you use technology to do it. So I think those are the, it may sound intuitive, I think it is in large part. But I think that's a key component of any system that gets adopted here, which is what's going to happen over the next sort of 3 to 6 months. That's mainly what I wanted to discuss, and that's the bulk of the project that I set out to do during my time here. The Mongolian property rights, this is sort of a non sequitur, but I've got 2 slides about property rights that I just want to introduce, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about them just because they're very different than other places. Most of land in Mongolia is state-owned land, so 99.94%, which is almost all of it. This is coming from a doctoral dissertation by Judge Nyando that she wrote 3 years ago. Only 0.06% of the land in this country is privately owned, which might not be surprising given the land density. There's 3 million people roughly and lots of land. But just most of it is land, 96% is land that's not used, 4% land under a long-term right, 0.2% has some sort of use right. So that's most of the land is not being used. Out of the private land, it's about half is owner's use and half is others' use. So someone owns it, but someone else is using it, which is not necessarily surprising, sort of through tenancy. So this slide is about use. So the first slide is about state-owned versus private. This slide is about family need. Is about the usage. So with respect to use, we have family use on the top, and we have business use on the bottom. How one acquires land, if you need it, if you have a family need, such as for residential, you're able to get land for free in the capital city at 0.07 hectares. If you're in the center of an IMAG or a province, it's 0.35 hectares, or in a SUM, up to 0.5 hectares. So this is a positive right that citizens in Mongolia have to access land. With respect to business purposes, there are distinctions between keeping animals, animal husbandry, and other than husbandry. And basically, just sort of gross summary, though there's negotiation with respect to price, or there's an auction, depending on whether the owner has existing rights to the land. Now, what happens when the government takes land to build, let's say, a new road or a new airport? what you don't have in the Mongolian constitution is a negative right protection against government takings. So in the United States Constitution, as well as state constitutions, we have what's called a takings clause. It's a negative right which says the government shall not take property unless there's a public purpose and unless they pay just compensation. So you don't have that here in Mongolia. What you have is a positive right. You have, when I say you, I mean citizens, residents have a right to certain amounts of land for free. And for business purposes, they can, individuals and groups can negotiate for land. In the context, so that's a positive right, versus in the United States approach is a negative right around, government has to have a public purpose and they have to pay just compensation. So just sort of different framing. I raise that because I teach property law in the United States, and I'm very interested in the connection between land registration here and the use of technology. I give the example of what happens if government needs to take land for a new road or a new airport, because it happened when the new Genghis Khan airport got built. And there's ongoing litigation between the existing property owners in Tuv province over what the government should provide in terms of compensation. Is it sufficient to give another piece of property? Well, when we look at real estate is unique. Another piece of property is another piece of property. It's different. Yes, you can buy, an owner can buy land, but owners feel particular connections to the land that they own. Maybe there's a family connection, maybe they like the view. So it's not fungible, meaning that you can't trade one piece of property for the other easily. And that's some of the issues that are going on right now in terms of litigation. Just, there's a dispute between former owners and the government, which already built the airport. The way it was resolved, so in the United States, we have case law related to takings. One of the most recent cases was from about 20 years ago at this point, where the United States Supreme Court said it's appropriate for the government to take land for economic development purposes. They still have to pay just compensation, but it's a public purpose to take land for economic development. In the Mongolian context, you haven't had a case. Well, we're in a civil law context here, so case law is not binding, but there's no negative right protection for property owners here, which I think is a significant. It creates a hurdle for owners to get their interests protected with respect to land. So, I guess, why am I talking about this in the context of law and technology? As the government moves to an e-file system for disputes, it's already moving to an electronic registry system for property rights. I think increasingly we're going to see disputes between Mongolian property owners and others, whether it's neighbors or whether it's the government. And I think it's important to consider the difference between positive rights to land, which are reflected in this slide, and then what happens when government takes property for a particular purpose. Since we have a small group, I would like to, I'm excited to have some sort of conversation, both what brings you here, your perceptions of the court system, and some of the things that I talked about. We're a little limited in terms of the microphone for reproducing the conversation on our digital channels, but if there's questions, would love to repeat your question, and then maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation. Yeah, Maya.
I did have a question, since property law is new to me. With the positive right, is there a right just to that size of land in general, if they're entitled to have that size of land, but it's not necessarily designated to a specific, just name on the specific area. It's just you have a claim to 0.5 hectares somewhere,
Right.
And that's why they're able to take the land, the government?
Yeah, so it's my understanding, based on the research that I did reading this dissertation, is that, right, the Land Act, the laws locally provide the opportunity for an individual or a family to get land for residential purposes. And there's some negotiation about where specifically that is in, in UB or in province capital or in a SU. So that's on the one hand. On the taking side, it's sort of a coincidence about where the property is and where the new development is that either the government or a developer wants to build. If it's a developer, then they have an opportunity to negotiate and try to purchase. If it's the government, the mechanisms are slightly different. It's right. There's some compensation scheme. The question is that compensation scheme acceptable to the owners? Well, if you're working with the government, they have additional power to confiscate it, based on what I can tell. John?
I've got a question, because in the time of socialism, the whole land belonged to the people. Some people saw it.
Right.
Right now, what we're being told here is that actually 96% of the land belongs to the state.
Right.
Well, that is a movement, it's a big change. Right? Basically, because if you go out in the countryside, you'll find people that actually own nothing, but they all the time use common land. They live on it, they have their animal husbandry and everything purely on common land, paying nothing for it. What actually is going to protect the rights of those people to common land? Because that's a very big question in Mongolia.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think a registry system where they can make a claim to say, this is my winter camp or this is my summer camp. These are, I have rights to graze my animals in these areas. That's actually an area where that issue about using public land has a lot of crossover connection with the United States. We have significant amounts of federal land in the United States, especially in the West. In Alaska, it's contested. It's contested by herders who don't want to pay grazing fees. In the state that I'm from, we have a massive amount of state-owned land that's a park. The Adirondack Park is huge. And the state has control over what gets built where, because through state zoning control. So there's no local control over land use decisions. Those decisions are made at the state level. So yeah, I think it's a what protects nomadic herders from having claims to their local land.
Yeah.
Well, there's use. The rights are based on usage, and it's based on possession too. They're possessing the property for certain periods of time. It's foundational issues in property law, or fundamental issues in property law, are use and possession, which is separate and apart from ownership.
Should we be saying then that there needs to be a huge publicity drive to encourage people in the countryside to register what they're using?
Yeah, so I don't have research on what percentage of nomadic property is registered. What I have seen is that in the courts, including in rural areas, there are electronic kiosks where individuals can use can transact business, and I'm told including with respect to checking land records as well as updating property records. So I think that in the use of cell phone technology, or the prevalence of cell phones and the government using digital technology that works on mobile devices, I think is a positive thing, both for checking registry and for actually registering property.
Thanks.
Yeah, Tom?
Well, my question is, and you may or may not have this data, is how much percentage of the herders actually have access or use mobile data technology, like their cell phones? We were talking about herders being able to register using mobile devices or something, right? Eventually, but how much of these herds actually use this technology in the first place, right? I'm curious, like, is the data of 99.4% mobile cell phone usage purely in these cities, or is it also included in these herders? Like, where's the data coming from? I'm just kind of curious.
Other people may have other statistics. I saw something like 98% of the population has cell phone. Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, I spent a night in in a gur camp with eagle hunters in Altai, or in Mongolia, and everyone had cell phones. They charged them using car batteries and solar panels and etc.
Excuse me, we have some data.
Sure.
3.3 million is the population.
Okay.
2.6 million is the Facebook user.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So,
Interesting.
yeah. It's on Facebook. Right.
Yeah, Dave.
Question. Is there a resistance amongst the nomad culture of private property? And also, like, how is it demarcated? Like, in the US you see a fence with, like, you will get shot if you come on my property sign.
Right.
I'm just kind of curious, like, how is that demarcated? But also, like, is there resistance? Because, it seems like a very capitalistic logic to privatize the land.
Right.
And I was just curious if there's like, hey, like maybe we don't want that. Like we actually want our economy.
Yeah.
We don't want privatizing land. I'd be curious to know if you have any insights about that.
Yeah. So I haven't read any studies. Well, there's a great study by a professor in the United States about called Order Without Law, looking at agricultural communities in the Pacific Northwest, and how individuals with livestock resolve disputes. It's like, oh no, we actually have these sort of cultural ways to resolve, or there's informal ways to resolve disputes that is separate and apart from the law. So I was asking questions when I went west, around how decisions are made or how disputes are resolved between nomadic communities, and just non-scientific. Some of the responses were like, "Oh, we call the police." Like if people can't, or if groups are, if the flocks get mixed or they're in the wrong area. Which I don't. I would love to do more research and find, or I'd love to connect with someone who's done that, or come back and do it sometime. But right. In the West, the invention of barbed wire in the 1800s was a very inexpensive way to start actually having boundaries to property. Here, I haven't seen a lot of that, but right there's that's one way to mark off one's property. It seems like, but there's also informal ways to do it, where there's customs and practices. I don't have enough research about how that happens, but yeah, I think as many people in the countryside shift to UB, I think there's a risk that some of that culture will go away. Right? I was in a gur today. We're asking, there are summer gurs in the Tove district, but in the winter they come to UB. Right? I don't know how common that is, but that's just another anecdotal conversation.
This isn't even a question, but just a thought that it seems kind of ideal for the sake of especially beneficial land. But I mean, the big debate here, if we're talking about climate, is that so much of the land is rapidly becoming of less quality, and that's part of the impetus to move. So to lay claim to dead land is almost looking at the people who had sort of useless dry lands in Nevada, and you have claim to that. Here you have the flexibility of, okay, I can pick up and move somewhere after a rough winter, after this place has been grazed through and maybe cycle back. So it does seem like privatization, yes, the benefit if you have good land that you're attached to in some form, but at the same time, tying yourself to a potentially sinking ship.
Right, why bother registering if the land is not going to be beneficial to your family or to your herd? Right, that's sort of the point of being nomadic to begin with, right? Yeah. Yeah, right. property rights and nomadic culture, I don't think necessarily jive, right? There's dilemmas and there's dilemmas you avoid, problems you solve. I think it's a dilemma.
Comment on the question. Comment is the response to this gentleman's question. So the amount of occurrences where some conflicts were, right, especially involved shooting, has been rising, especially if you look at the media. So it was kind of unheard of that nomads were just shooting each other because of pasture, right?
Okay.
So that's a very sensitive topic, and people would say like, we never done that. Mongolians usually do not do that, but in reality it's happening. So basically, sometimes like we talked, professor talked about the summer camps and winter camps. So winter camps especially can be taken under possession in terms of property. So in that sense, it creates this gray area where the surrounding land of that winter camp is de facto used as possession, or sometimes like a possessed land. So in that sense, someone can just take a claim on that, right? In a sense that this is our demarcated area. We used to pasture here. We pasture now, our herds, etc. So because of that, lots of conflict is rising, and usually even during Qin area, as well as socialist era, the administrative level was also involved with relocating the land between the pastures and households, etc., etc. But that dissipated because of 1999 transition in Mongolia, so which created lots of problems also. So basically, lots of different experiments, and we have to add mining also to that. What is even the mining license? Is it property? What is the mining area, right? How do you delineate the pastures? Usually customarily sold pasture lands with designated mining area as well as mining operation area, etc. So yeah, you basically see the capitalist logic, the neoliberal logic coming here, and then the traditional institutions that are trying to cope with that, transform it and try to live with that. So yeah, lots of different questions.
But is there a resistance to that? Like, is there like,
I guess
this is alien, like we don't want this, like this is,
yeah.
Who should own the land? Like, should anyone own land?
Yeah,
This idea, I think is really interesting, because I mean, especially since the US has been so colonized by that logic.
There were lots of
I'm interested in how it's like working here. Like, is there a resistance to that? Like, we actually don't want this
Definitely.
capitalistic logic.
Definitely.
Yes.
From both sides.
Okay.
There were lots of recommendations from international financial institutions like ADB, especially in the 1990s, that maybe we could privatize the pasture land,
Right.
which was, of course, opposed by very many different groups, not only nationalist groups, but many different groups. So we basically saying, fundamentally, the right to movement is more important than the right to property of land. So basically,
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I'd be very interested to look at the mining licenses too. I haven't found them, and I haven't looked at them in English yet, but yeah, I'm curious, because that's more of a temporary use for extraction purpose than it is for long-term ownership.
Sorry, I forgot the question. So we have this, I don't know how prevalent it is around the world, but we have the ownership, possession, and usage rights, right?
Yes.
It's level.
Right.
So I'm not sure about how prevalent it is around the world,
Right.
and is it prevalent in like pastoralist, right, with countries, or U.S. type of countries with lots of land? So that was a very general question.
Yeah. Right. So most of what we talk about in terms of ownership rights to land in the United States is what we say fee simple absolute, which means you own the whole enchilada. You own all of the rights to use the land, to borrow, to mortgage.
Barter, mortgage.
Yeah, right. We talk about that's where we talk about a bundle of sticks or a bundle of rights. right, you can mortgage it, you can exclude other people from the land, you can destroy it, right? You can create waste. That's typically what we talk about. There's other, so that's sort of the ownership of fee simple. There's use rights as well, either through lease. You can lease mineral rights, sort of subsurface rights, things like oil and gas, exploration, minerals. There's ownership, use, possession can occur through a variety of ways too, just by trespass going on someone else's property. And if you are there for a long enough period of time, and you act like it's your property, this is mine, you can own through what's called adverse possession. But then there's also sort of government land or federal land that you can either get licensed to graze your herds on or use in particular ways through some sort of license. So some similarities, some differences. Definitely not, in terms of the distribution of land right now, we don't have that same process of, you can go to an area and get allocated a piece of property. Hundreds of years ago, when the middle and western part of the United States was being populated, those types of laws, like homesteading, if you make your home on this particular land, then you can get ownership rights. It was common in the past, not now.
Could you go back like 2 slides? Just want to reference something.
Yeah, like
this one. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious about the technology aspect, especially like the stuff you've been working on, right? So
yeah.
kind of stuff about literacy about legal rights, right? So it's very important that, as you said, people know about the rights that they have, right, and how they can assert it. But mainly, my question is, what sort of technology or what kind of projects are you working on, or is the organization that you're working on to kind of increase the literacy about legal rights specifically in the law?
Yeah. So we're talking about it. My recommendations are going to be that that the project going forward, however it goes forward, has literacy around individual and group rights.
So there's no specific developments yet, but you want to focus on these specific goals.
I think it's an important component.
Right, it is. Yeah, that's why I was curious if it was.
Yeah.
So in your mind, what's the best way to go about promoting that literacy?
Yeah. I think individuals need lawyers or advocates or smart law students to walk them through what their rights are. And the example that I give is how many people live currently in an apartment that you rent or have ever lived in an apartment that had repairs that needed to be made, that the landlord, how many of you either currently or have ever lived in an apartment that had repairs that needed to be made? Currently, okay. If you're in certain states in the United States, you have what's called an implied warranty of habitability. So it's implied, meaning that you have it whether or not it's stated in your lease. Mm-hmm. Warranty of habitability means that the landlord has to fix things. If you didn't know that you have, so the first step is the knowledge. If you go to take a property law class, you learn there. So I think that, to my mind, it's working either with pro bono or free lawyers or law students who are learning the law and providing representation as part of their studies. Part of my teaching in the United States is teaching law students how to be lawyers by working with live clients. So the warranty of habitability is one tool that we developed, or that students of mine developed alongside a tenants' rights organization. So I think that, to my mind, the solution to getting that information is some level of community organizing along with lawyers and law students who can provide that information. Then figuring out what the best methodology is to assert your right, and then trying to use technology to do it. I spent 4 years at about $10,000 coming up with a tool called the harm calculator, the habitability, abatement of rent mathematical calculator or harm calculator. And it's difficult to use, to come up with a piece of technology that's going to give a tenant who has repairs issues, for example, the skill, like the knowledge and information, the skills on what they need to ask for, and then use a tech solution to actually claim, get their rights in court. The result of the project that we had was a piece of paper. You still have to take the piece of paper, you have to go to court. So if you're working, you have to take time off your job to go there. If you have kids, you have to either bring them with you or put them in childcare. So there's a sort of cost, and then you have to pay. Then you have to pay a fee, and you have to come back in 3 months to have a hearing, which does not justice make. So in the context of an overall court system where we have a civil court, we have a criminal court, we have an administrative court, I think we need a sort of training judges, court staff, as well as citizens about what their rights are, what their most frequently asserted rights might be. Where I'm from, if you're in an auto crash, your insurance company pays for damage to your vehicle up to $50,000. That would be, so we call it no fault. So whoever, once a driver's car insurance company pays to fix their vehicle. Here, we see a lot of people waiting for police to file a police report because insurance providers want a police report before they will pay for any repairs. Well, we all know what that means. People back up traffic waiting for police, and it exacerbates an already clogged traffic system. If you move to a system of no-fault insurance, for instance, well then people are going to decide, am I going to make a claim or not? And people who have frequent claims are going to pay more premiums for insurance. So that's sort of a backward way of thinking about maybe it's an example of sort of a substantive legal right that you back into a solution to try to solve a problem, getting cars that have crashes off the street instead of just waiting for police to show up.
There was a number 22 different, what was that, sorry? In one of these, one of your slides?
This way or the other way?
Other way. 22 different management systems.
Oh, yeah, right, this one. Right here.
So it includes both the existing ones, right? Paper-based, or what is it?
So there are some sort of internal case management system, which just means that the public is not interacting with the system, but the court, so the judge and the court staff are. So there were in Sukbadar District Civil Court, there were about 7,000 cases filed a year. Most of those are contract disputes. So they have a system, they use Microsoft Office, and then they have a cloud-based system which manages that information. So that's what I mean. The ones that I've seen are all digital already, but they're just internal to the court users. They're not external facing. So if you file a case, you can't see the documents that were filed. So the goal is to move to an e-file system where litigants or people with disputes can file using file online and then also access.
One unified system.
Yeah, the e-Mongolia for courts. There are systems where you can read court opinions. There's Supreme Court, appellate courts, and then courts of first instance, where the opinions are just sort of passive, they're posted, but there's no interaction currently.
So with the hope to build on some sort of existing digital system, you just expand it out, or to create a whole new thing?
A whole new thing where the systems talk to each other. Yeah, and there's a vendor involved that,
ICT?
yeah, you know them? Yeah, so they do a number of they already work, they have almost 100% of the hospital technology business, they have banking business, some of the mobile phone payment systems, they run the tech on that.
Where are they based in Mongolia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very smart coders, very smart business people. It's vertically integrated, so there's a number of different companies. Yeah, they're the ones who are coming up with the tech to make the systems talk to each other.
Many of the Mongolians I know personally are concerned as to how safe digitalisation is for the individual. They're afraid that their information is going out. You've got no idea who's looking at it.
Right.
You don't know whether there's a criminal looking at it or not.
Right.
And they feel threatened even to go on, e-Mongolia, right? They don't want to do it.
Right.
Because they're giving too much information to people they don't know.
Yeah.
So how does one tackle that? Because I can see the point of making it digitalised, marvellous. How you do to help these people? Big question.
I don't have an answer. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Well, right, there's theories that Michelangelo's journals were in paper, right? Turns out paper is a really good way to preserve information. When Walter Isaacson wrote the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, he had journals to look at. When we put digital information like this picture of my son on this phone, we're not necessarily, some people think all of the digital records that we have are just going to be obliterated at some point. I don't know that I feel that way, or I don't know that I think that, but yeah, building trust in a digital age is, I don't know if it's a problem I don't know if it's a problem to solve or a dilemma to avoid.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to reinforce that it's encrypted and that, it states all the privacies and like where the data is being stored and this and that. But there's still mistakes. I read something like a week ago where people's counseling notes ended up in some place that was like easily accessible to other people without their consent. Like, there's weird things that can happen with digital management, and that was an example of that's really sensitive information that was being seen by multiple people that shouldn't have been. So there's so they just have to be very thorough and you have all kinds of encryption and
The Chinese court system is using blockchain technology in a closed universe so that only the courts can share, the blockchain exists only between court systems, which is a closed way of looking at information designed to keep information secure. Is that going to prevent the data leak? Well, I think, of course not. But it's their attempt to keep the information, locked. And at least with respect to blockchain, the notion is it builds trust among users.
What do you think about the court workload? Because you said that in Уулзалт district, there are 7,000 cases in a year.
For civil cases, yeah.
What do you think about? What about it is compared to USA numbers? Is it too much or just?
Yeah. I don't have a great perspective on the workload of the court or the workload of judges. I think that the resources, including staff and judges, should go up and down depending on how busy the court is. So I visited Hanul last Friday, and they're having an increasing number of cases filed because there's more development and more people. So it would make sense that they get more resources and more staff and more judges based on increasing filings. But, you know, maybe you look at, so National Center for State Courts is a non-governmental organization in the United States that has tools for judicial efficiency and for communicating to the public about performance of courts. I think if we knew how many cases courts were receiving and how many they were resolving in a year, or for instance, I think that would be useful information for people to know. So, you know, this is the average. And maybe some of this information is available already, but I think the more information provided by the court system to people, the more people can decide for themselves how they're going to resolve their disputes.
Your slide says judicial independence, right?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting term. Now, in UK, right, the courts are not under the state. The system is controlled by the state.
Right.
But all the judges, the whole thing is not. It's completely politically independent of the state. That's in order to prevent corruption.
Right.
Right? And also, the judges and people in it are paid huge amounts of money, so they're not going to accept bribes.
Right.
Now, to what extent? Well, I don't know. I don't think about USA or really about here. To what extent is the court system separate from the state in either USA or Mongolia?
So quick question, are judges elected in the UK as well?
Yes.
Right. So many judges in state courts in the United States are elected, depending on the state. Where I'm from in New York, we have judges run for state trial court, so they have to get elected by voters.
Okay.
For courts like, we have a family court that's devoted to custody and that sort of thing. Family court judges are elected. City court, district trial court, they're elected. At appellate court levels, they're appointed. At least where I'm from. And that is going to vary state by state.
Yeah.
Here, the General Judicial Council is going to nominate judges, so they handle the nomination process, which is a little bit different. And then the executive is going to approve with advice from the legislative branch.
In England, the highest court is the House of Lords. But that's either because they have a theological position, they're archbishops or something of the church, or that they're hereditary heirs. Right? That is not controlled by the government, because the government is the House of Commons. So it's completely independent of the state.
Okay.
I would tell you that just purely as an interesting point.
Like it's inherited by bloodline.
Yes, so it can't be controlled by anyone.
Well,
Like the House of Lords?
House of Lords is, yeah.
Similar.
Yeah, House of Lords is
I think we should replicate that here.
good.
I think we should replicate that here.
Well, Empire. Young Empire went to see it with me, so he knows.
I think some people would like that very much.
are there noble family lineages? In like
Some are hoping, but
Has there, this is, now I'm curious about that. Is there any resistance to the House of Lords?
Oh yes, the president, Keir Starmer wants to abolish it.
Okay, yeah, well.
I just thought I'd tell you that.
Yeah.
That's most of what I wanted to cover. You know, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for listening and engaging in the topics, multiple as they are. And thanks to Maggie, thanks to the ACMS team, thanks to our friends in the American Quarter for providing the space. Excited to say hello and meet everyone here. Thank you.
thank you.
Very good.
Very good.